Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our SF Masterworks reading group. Today, we are going to be discussing Babel-17 by Samuel R Delaney. we are the SF Masterworks reading group reads one book from the SF Masterworks series that I believe it was Golang's published. We are reading one book every month, and that will take us approximately 15 years to finish. Don't do the math. We try not to. But the next three books that we are going to be reading are A Lot of Light by Roger Zelazny, The Fifth Head of Cerberus by Gene Wolfe, and no flyby for that one, Chris, and
No.
Gateway by Frederick Pohl. So, um, over the course of February, March, and April. If you'd like to join us for any of these discussions, either here in the discussion group or on the forum, please consider checking out the Page Chewing forum where we do all our planning for this reading group. And with me, of course, I have the usual group of wonderful people we talk about these books with. Livia, would you like to start us off with introductions?
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm Livia J. Elliott. I'm an author and also a podcaster. My podcast is called Books and None, and I do deep dives on the thematic work of different books.
Chris.
Yes, my name's Chris Mullen. Sometimes YouTuber, sometimes appear on other people's channels talking about things that I love. And yeah, that's about it. Jared, you're up.
I'm Jared. I run the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel and also here on Page Chewing forums as well. And Susanna.
And I am Susanna Imaginario. I am a writer and sometimes YouTuber at 10 of the Weird.
Nice. So, what's the general verdict on Babel-17? I finished it like 15 minutes before we started recording.
That's not enough time, Varsha, to actually think what you know about this, because I closed the book on this and kind of went, I'm not sure exactly what happened in that book at all. And even though I don't know a few hours ago, I think I like it more every hour that's passed.
Yeah,
I'm going to be honest and just get it out of the way. I hated it so much, and I rarely actually say that about a book. Usually, I get bored reading a book. I DNF'd it, by the way. I couldn't. When it started with the gimmick, it's with the italics, and I gave up. But it really made me angry for so many reasons, and yeah.
Yeah, we should talk about all the angry reasons. Which italics though? What I'm just trying to figure out.
The inset italics ones, is it the ones where the page
with the squares
changes
at the end?
Yeah.
Yes.
I actually had the opposite reaction. I just loved it and read it twice. So once for my podcast, once for this.
So this I don't know.
That bit? Yeah.
I don't know how to work my camera. There we go.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice to see that in a different edition it was formatted the same, Jared, actually, because I always wonder about that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I think the Kindle edition does it too, if I remember correctly. But yeah.
But Livia loved it.
Yeah,
so this is it. We have the two opposite ends of the scale. This is fantastic.
So the three of us can just sit back and watch the two fight it out, right?
At least I wasn't the only one. I was thinking, I'm just going to be the naysayer again. But yeah, almost as bad as Cities in Flight. Even though I don't know, because Cities in Flight bored me, this one enraged me. So I don't know which one is.
Different reactions, at least.
What's worse, being bored or being mad?
To be explored. Jared, what do you think?
Being bored.
This was not my favorite at all. We'll get into that. Most of it was I didn't quite appreciate his what do you call that? Science babble. I didn't appreciate it that much. I didn't find it engaging. And I'm not a big, science babble guy anyways, but a lot of other science fiction stories, I can get through it knowing it's going to engage me into the rest of the story. But this one I didn't feel that. I was sad about that because I thought he started with an interesting character, um,
Hmm.
with Doctor. What was her name?
Wong,
Rydra?
right or wrong?
Wong. Yeah, right or Wong. Yeah, and I was like, okay, this could be an interesting character, but then it didn't. The connection the connections didn't get me engaged in her story, and it didn't get me engaged in the other stories in there. I thought some of his um, description was, when it was there, it was kind of bloated and
Mm.
didn't um, it didn't serve to give me a good picture of what was going on. And that's just my opinion. I wish there was some ideas in the book, which a lot of these books have, that they're big idea. And this one was about, the language, the idea of an alien language that can have this profound effect on a person and stuff like that. And um, but I couldn't get past a lot of the techno babble. That was it was just ironic because it's called Babel-17, so it's kind of ironic there. Uh, but I'm curious to see what Livia pulled out of this, because I have a feeling there's probably there is some thematic stuff in here. I know that, and I'm curious what Livia, you pulled out of that.
Oh, I actually quite liked it, mostly because it made me think. It had that idea, that style of old sci-fi, big ideas, big themes. The book does go a lot into the theme, sometimes just explaining language. Like there is a chapter that starts just with the meaning of you,
Hmm.
and it says like you is a noun and all of this, and very technical from the language side. But towards the end, I think the book tends to converge into the idea that the words I and you are actually synonyms, and that we all should have the same respect for the you than we have for the I. And without having the knowledge of the language as he's seeing it, I think it will be very difficult to understand why Babel-17 as a language ends up affecting Butcher and Rydra and actually making them so empathetic with each other. I did have a what the fuck moment when I was reading, and you get that part in which she starts thinking in Babel-17,
Hmm.
and I counted it, those are 3 pages of a single sentence. And so you have the 3 pages, and you have the little squares at the side that are actually the English translation of what is happening in the middle. I thought that was genius, not only in the execution, it's as um, Do Unicorns Read? That booktube channel, she mentioned that it was ergodic literature, that you have that placement and so on, and you play with that. I thought it was very well done because I'm a bilingual, and in many cases I have realized that thinking in Spanish is not the same as thinking in English. I can be wordier in one language than in the other. And some of the problems that Rydra felt when trying to express something in English in Babel-17 or vice versa, I had them between Spanish and English. Things that I don't have quite the right word in English or in Spanish, because it goes both ways. So when I have, it felt quite realistic how he achieved that problem that polyglots or people that knows more than one language have. So I think that is also why I ended up liking it so much, because I could relate to some degree to the problems with the languages.
I thought the chapter with the you and I explanation was actually pretty cool. That was the part of the book I liked.
Was
Um,
beautiful.
yeah, when he was when she
Yeah.
was when she was trying to explain you and I to the butcher. um I thought that part was pretty cool, and I thought there was actually, I was like, oh, okay, finally I'm getting in some good character interaction, and hopefully the story will jump off from there. But then it just that, like, the next chapter or whatever it was, it just seemed to jump ahead in plot
Yeah.
and kind of just lose that what he gained for me in the storytelling department, he lost in going further into like into this plot, which was basically just them figuring it out, this mystery basically of the language, and it lost me after that. Like I was like, oh, good chapter, and then it kind of fell off for me after that.
Yeah, it's something that I wasn't really into in this book is at the end. This may be a bit of a spoiler for anyone watching, but
It's all
uh,
spoilers.
yeah, they end up comparing Babel-17 to some old programming languages like Fortran and so on,
Mhm.
and the whole thing of the paradox. And my engineering brain was like, just nope, nope, nope. Doesn't work like that. That is something that I actually wanted to ask Marsha what you thought about.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I was expecting the conclusion to be that this is some higher order language, and the conclusion was actually here's a language. It's actually like this language that we use to make dumb machines do the things we want. So it's an instruction language, but it somehow has more meaning. Like,
Yeah.
what is it? Is it because of the zeros and yeah? I didn't see that
I
reasoning.
didn't
I didn't agree with it necessarily, but
I didn't take that meaning from it. I took it that the language was supposed to change how you think and process. And actually,
mm,
because of the constructs of the language, it's almost like the language was a virus insofar as you trying to learn it and understand it changed the way that you thought enough that you things that you would normally care about and think about, because you're thinking in a different language and form, you would no
mm,
longer be thinking and learning about, and you sort of get wrapped
Yeah.
up in yourself then, rather than it necessarily being I think they only use the example of Fortran, etc. To use the example like there's another language that doesn't use you and I as pronouns. Who is doing the action doesn't matter in a lot of things, and it was to create an allegory to that rather than actually kind of say
Yeah.
this language is like that, and that's the way that I took that from. So it bothered me less, I think, in
oh,
that regard.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I think the bits about um reprogramming their brain by fixing the language, that yeah, they built a patch to fix whatever was broken. But yeah, I think that I found iffy, but I like what you just said, Chris. That makes a lot of sense. It's only in the
Yeah.
analogy to the lack of the concepts of you and I, just do this, do that, which
Yeah.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That part actually, it made me think of another book, Fahrenheit 451, and the idea of how what you think of can actually change, how you behave. This book in particular is based on the strong Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is actually demonstrated not to be true. So that is why it makes so much emphasis on the uh, programming side of it. But something to think of, reflect perhaps, is the fact that we think that I and you are words that are so common and they are so intrinsic to our language. What could happen if you take a person that doesn't know any other language and you teach them Babel-17 without those two words? How will that affect their worldview? I think it's quite a big question, like these old sci-fi books. But it should have an effect. Like Chris said, it should reprogram somebody to think in a completely different way if you have no way of thinking of yourself and of oneself and the others. So I and you, and how important they both are.
Hmm. And I was a little confused at one point. Was it because of Babel-17 that he lost the IU
Yeah.
ability, or was it or did he lose that before he got Babel-17?
No, I think he lost it when Butcher lost it when he was taught Babel-17.
Okay, all right, that's when he lost it.
And
Right.
yeah, and I liked it how he resorted to different things like beating his chest, kind of like saying the I, using body language. Yeah, and how important body language is to add more meaning to whatever you are saying, right?
It's also, you know, another example of kind of to your point, Jared, of like he didn't care about a story in this. There really was no point to story. He used story as a vehicle for telling you something, and then as soon as you
Yeah.
kind of get to the point, what, oh, I'm invested in the characters and the story that's going forward, and he says, I know, but I have another idea that I want to get to here. So we're going to park that. We're going to call that part 4, and we're going to move to part 5, and we're going to explore another idea here. And again, on the concept of having really short fiction, if you know what I mean, these are really explorations of ideas rather than story, and like I can sort of totally agree that that's phenomenally frustrating, because this feels like a very Jekyll and Hyde book a lot of the way through. It starts off in one place and it decides to do something different for the next part. It decides to do something different in another way in the next part. Like there's a lot of dialogue in this, and I never knew who was speaking. Like it just kept, you know, passing back and forth between people. It never named who was who at any stage, and I was like, it obviously isn't important who's speaking. It's just kind of exposition to kind of get to a point or explain something that was going. But I remember reading 3 or 4 pages and going, I have no idea who has said what in any of this at any stage, which sort of created a bit of frustration for sure.
Yeah, especially when they went into that, I don't know if it was a bar or if it was a lounge of some sort of underground place to get her crew or whatever, and half the time, like I didn't know who was speaking in that place, who was speaking to who, and it was all in lingo and colloquialisms, and it wasn't, you didn't get a good like a good setup for that in order to understand that setting. And so the setting was confusing, the lingo was confusing, and you know, you could probably sit there and go back and dissect it one word by one word and go, okay, now I know who's speaking, and now I know why they're speaking that way.
Yeah.
But there was many times where the only reason I knew what's his name was speaking, the one who couldn't say peas.
Brass.
The
Brass,
pilot?
yes, Brass. The only reason I knew he was speaking was because there was a piece missing, and that was it. And I was like, oh, a good thing that P wasn't there, because otherwise I would have got confused on who that was, you know. And so I was so that throws you off when you're trying to read this thing. And ultimately it was like, well, it wasn't really that important to know who was speaking, because he was just spitting out the ideas on the page, and it really it didn't matter. And that not mattering to the plot or to the idea or the language doesn't make an enjoyable read for me personally.
Yeah, I had the same feeling than you when I read it for the first time. I generally have a lot of trouble following dialogue that is not tagged. It generally loses me. So when I read it the first time, I was just like the same. This is Brass because he's missing the P, and who is the rest one? But when I read it the second time, I realized that the customs officer, who is the only one that doesn't speak in lingo, he is as lost as a reader. And this being a book about language, on my second read, I interpreted this as perhaps something purposefully done so that you feel lost around all the lingo and you follow on with the customs officer, who seems to be the only one who speaks in a more traditional way. And when I tried to read it, like focusing on him, it actually made sense because the way it was written, it made me feel the same feeling of being lost, right? I felt the same as he was feeling. And I thought that perhaps it could have been done that way, especially because Delaney did have a literature bachelor, I think. So he may have been playing with language on a novel about language, you know?
Yeah, I definitely think he was trying to play around with language. And I kind of wish that with the customs officer, if he was a more prominent role in the book and we could have followed him throughout, then we would have had that vehicle to follow the whole story, which is a common that's a common practice. You're like, that's Frodo. You're following Frodo throughout the story, and he's the blank slate that you're following and kind of filling up. You're getting the you're learning about the world through him, and if we could have learned about this world through that customs officer, then I think it would have been better throughout. But unfortunately, we were thrown stuff about this universe that it was chaotically thrown at us and not presented in that manner of having that blank slate to follow through and learn about it with him.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the chaotic aspects of it. And I think, except for the Forever War and I Am Legend, all of the Masterworks books have felt to me like that. Like they are, well, Cities in Flight particularly so, but the the book that shall not be named. um,
We
it,
love naming it.
but it feels like they don't spend a lot of time explaining, which is a thing that authors who trust their readers do, but it doesn't feel like there's enough information to interpret and figure out. Like it feels like they've cut it short because they have to, rather than, okay, the reader will get this because I've laid these other uh breadcrumbs that they can get to this point from. It's like we change scenes, introduce new concepts that, well, we can usually figure out from the context what they are, but the reorientation process is not smooth, if that makes sense. Like I've read books that expect you to get it, or like that don't handhold whatever the popular terminology is, where things are explained, but and they don't feel jarring quite the same way these books have felt to me, the books that I've read and liked. So yeah, it has been interesting. Like things like, I don't understand how much time has passed, or I don't understand how he got to this point from where he was before. And like, and the answer might be it's not important. Just like focus on the ideas that I'm trying to explore here, and that's probably what it is, like you said, Chris. So the focus is less on trying to tell a story well, than and more on, hey, here's a cool idea that I'm going to explore the heck out of, which he did. Which I thought, I loved the idea itself that was being explored, and the I guess underlying philosophy that is also in that's potentially being explored, like the idea that language is tied to our consciousness to such a deep extent that we can change who we are or how we behave, or that we can do a lot more with fewer words. And I think it's nice that we read The Story of Your Life recently, some of us, which kind of plays with the same idea. And Arrival, I'm sure everyone here has probably seen Arrival, right? It kind of plays with the same idea of language doing so much more than what we maybe do with it, which is really cool. Like it's not a thought that it's not something that I've thought about a whole lot, but to go in that direction, I think is a really cool idea. And yeah, that, I think the idea itself is really, really cool. I was very happy with that aspect of the book for sure.
Yeah, the idea, great. The execution, no, it's it is just playing with words. It's not telling a story. It's just using. So maybe my issue was I couldn't help reading the book from a writer's perspective. It has every trick and wordplay and pun in the book that you can imagine. It's so wrapped up in creating an effect, which is great in small doses. I love when the writer is able to break the rules and create strange combinations of words and for effect. But this was just a very long affectation throughout. It was so wrapped up in the wordplay, in that kind of forgot to tell a story. The main character, oh my word, just the name, right or wrong. It's like everything is wordplay. And wow, she was like the all gifted. It wasn't even the special one of the story. She was like Pandora. She had all the gifts. She was a mathematician, a telepath, Jesus, oh, beautiful. And yeah, it was just, here's a cool idea, and look what I can do with words. And yeah, that's pretty much it. There was nothing else. And I was getting, it was very hard to read, yeah, to actually follow through any bit of action or dialogue, like you were saying. It was just, I found it very frustrating. It wasn't that I wasn't getting it. The idea is clear. It's just how it was written. I thought it was very arrogant. Um, it's just there were some analogies and just entire sentences that I just, like, me as a non-native English speaker would not get away with it. People will say, "Oh, you just can't write English," but because he's a native English man, he can get away. He's a genius. Yeah, I was very, very angry. But I
One
know
thing I
I'm
need to
probably
comment on
minority.
that. So one
Sorry?
thing I need to comment on that is that I will take this protagonist, a female protagonist, over almost any other female protagonist written by a man during the 50s, 60s.
No, don't
At least
say
the ones that I have. At least she isn't portrayed in a negative way. There are in many other books that the protagonists are sexualized, or the pretty girl just to be there. In this case, at least she has agency. She feels like a person. Yeah, it's kind of
no.
like a Mary Sue.
She's like the prototype of every woke character that ever existed in the last 10 years. It's like the super special one, with a traumatic past, and everyone loves her just because she's so special. I mean, sorry, I'm getting angry already. I would rather have a flawed character being sexualized and at least feels real than this, because it just kept adding up. There's just more. She was just better at something else afterwards, and it was so tiring. It's just no.
I
Rant
sort of
over.
see. I sort of see both points actually in a lot of ways. I think at the start of the book, and again, this is part of the Jekyll and Hyde nature of it, they spent a lot of time crafting why she was intelligent, etc. The scene with her in the bar, I think, was actually brilliant when she was reading again this non-verbal communication things or slight tics that somebody has about how language can be used in one way. How she was able to read somebody's thoughts. And as somebody, I mean, it basically said to me she's neurodivergent to start off with, because that is a hallmark that I can ascribe. Like I read people's auras, and I know very slight changes in body position and stuff, in not the same way, but in like a similar kind of way. And I was like, I've never seen that put in the book, but it kind of give an insight into her as a person, because also she wasn't brash about it. She wasn't bold about it. She was gripping the edge of the tables. The cost that it cost her, if you know what I mean, in terms of, it wasn't comfortable for her.
Mhm.
She didn't appreciate that. And I love that part of the book. And I actually thought after the first like 2-3 chapters, this is going to be something really special. But to Susanna's point, that was pretty much the end of her character development at that stage. They pretty much eschewed at that stage for the part of going to look for another idea or another character. And what was weird about this book is that it has so many characters that it gives off the stink or smell of a character-based story, but literally is only concerned about one in the end, which is the butcher. And even that character is like a non-event. He doesn't even know who he is. So it's almost like a joke playing on itself.
With her, I think the bird scene, at the start when she gets scared, it's only mentioned again at the end. And there is kind of like a tie back of, okay, what happened there? It has a sense here. But yeah, it's like all of the characters, as most in these sci-fi books, they are vehicles to tell the story, right? So they are not developed as characters as we would expect from the current standards.
Yeah, I think for the first 3 chapters, I found it difficult to like her. And I think well, maybe not like her so much as see what everyone else saw in her, uh, because the first 3 chapters they had it was first 3 or 4 chapters, I think, until we get to her perspective. um I didn't like the way the other people were thinking about her or looking at her. There's some of it bugged me. Like, I think the way General Forrester thought about her, I did not like at all. And then the customs officer, that was an interesting trip. But I didn't get attached to the character at all. But I found her interesting to read about. And I think the what you I think you mentioned neurodivergence, Chris. And
Mhm.
initially her ability to do everything put me off. I'm like, oh, I don't need another Amalfi. But uh but I think the it's interesting because you could, in theory, buy her ability to do all the things she does by the fact that she's a telepath, right? That and her analytical skills, which,
Yeah.
she has
Mhm.
really strong analytical skills, which she's using to read micro expressions and stuff. So maybe the fact that she can, because she is a telepath, she also knows how to connect them to various body postures and stuff. So like the two abilities interplay and do well. Poetry, she explained as she's picking thoughts off of other people's heads and completing it for them. And again, the math comes with analysis, I suppose. And apparently people here live to be 150 years old, so maybe you can spend 15 years in school learning everything again. So in theory there's an explanation for
Yeah.
everything that she can do, even though I can see from reading Amalfi how I hated that one character did everything. And there are jobs for those people. But this one this one felt slightly different. Like, I started off feeling unhappy about it, but I was like, yeah, I can understand why this works. um yeah, that was what I was going to say about it. But it
No,
was, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
sorry. I just was going to point out, like, how many of these books actually use some sort of telepathy, you know?
Mm,
Like all of them. And with The Stars, My Destination, they also had a telepath, right? So I don't
mm.
know if it was something because of the time period in which these books were written, late 50s, 60s. So
I think the Forever War also had some sort of I forget what it's called, but
telepath?
not a telepath person, but someone who can read emotions, or they can, and like, not EMF. There's some short form for it, for the extra emissions, like psychic emissions. Apparently, like there's a short form for it. That even Forever War, I think, had something like that. They had someone who would test on that index, and they were more affected by the aliens than the others, if I remember correctly. Something like that. Uh, but yeah, that's a pretty interesting topic, that that a lot of these books seem to feature telepathy in some form. Yeah.
But it was the level of detail they went into on that, because when she's explaining to the character afterwards exactly how she did it, and I think that was the bit that I just kind of went, "This is magnificent." That the person was able to do it themselves, and yet at the end, it was kind of that attitude that people have when they're around brilliant people or otherwise. But there's no way you did that. There's no way
Mm,
you did that on the spot. Like, they explained exactly what was happening and how it was done, and they was like, "Yeah, I can see that'll make perfect sense," but no. And they sort of left it alone, and it's kind of went,
mm,
that's such a brilliant way to write that scene, and to have her explain it to the bartender at the end, as being the vehicle to explain it to the reader.
mm,
Uh,
mm. Yeah, yeah. The, ah, sorry, I was going to say something as a follow up to that. I forgot. But wait, did you mean the last scene, Chris, or did you mean the scene in the bar?
scene in the bar when she's
Oh yeah.
explaining exactly how she spoke to the general at the time,
Mm,
and exactly how she knew
Yeah.
what he was going to say, and it was in such a micro detail that I
yeah,
went,
yeah.
uh, he- Samuel Delaney obviously lives that in some aspect, because the way that he was able to do it, obviously, he's talking about an experience that he's had. Because even the reactions to it, etc., felt sort of personal in that regard.
Oh yeah, I think I remember which scene. It's the one that starts out with "I will explain, but you won't understand," and like
Yes, indeed.
and he concludes that you're just making this up. Yeah, that's yeah. It's almost like, fine, if you just want to lie, I'm not going to listen.
Like, it was exactly that feeling. Even though she went to great lengths to explain, and he kind of went, well, what if they said it like this? Well, then I would say this, and then well, that's exactly what happened. And he was like, but no, that's not what happened here.
Is that echoing something that happened later in the book, where I think there was a similar sequence, but in Babel-17, where if this happened, I could just readjust to this. I seem to recall something like that. It wasn't with the butcher, but yeah. Anyway, like I really liked how the language was used in this. I made a list of all. Sorry, did anyone have anything to say in addition to that? I was starting a new topic. Jared?
Well, I have a new topic too. So I just have a few lines that I thought were pretty cool, that laid down some good ideas. And that was like, there are certain ideas which have words for them. If you don't know the words, you can't know the ideas, and if you don't have the idea, you don't have the answer. And that was like related to the explaining of the you and I language, and then there was like the idea of, until something is named, it doesn't exist. And those are general big concepts of language that he was trying to throw in there, and just get people to think about. And so, and those are cool ideas that he was trying to explore and trying to play with in the book here. It would have been a lot cooler if it was a cooler story to go with it, but it was so there's stuff in here to get out of the book, basically.
Didn't he use the example of French for the words for hot and cold, for chaud and froid, as basically saying they had no word for warm, and because they had no word for warm, how do you conceptually think of gradations of hot and cold between and other things? So I think he explained it really well, and actually I will point people to Media Death's Cult's review of this, because I think it's an absolutely astonishing review of this book, of what I think is quite a difficult book to review. He's the examples of how the Inuit people have 50 words for snow, and if they have 50 words for snow, their understanding of what snow is compared to a layperson must be on a whole other level to what other people think of it. And so, like, language gives people this idea of power, or gives people understanding, and you would only think of the word if you understood what it is a bit slow. And I think that's kind of the basis of what the whole book is, in terms of what it's saying. Like, different languages and the way you think in different languages force you to think very, very differently. And what if you use that as a weapon? What if that was the weapon rather than chemical warfare or anything else? And I think that as an idea is extraordinary. Whether the execution you get that out of the book is another thing, but the idea or the thought is definitely worth exploring.
Yeah, again, great idea. I'm just going to give a couple examples. Great idea, but like, he used some Portuguese words in here as well, and one of them, in one situation, I'm not even sure if he was aiming for the Portuguese or the Spanish, just because then the context changed to Spanish, but I kind of lost track there. The point is, there was no need to use that word. There are perfectly good equivalent words in English, and I think they just used it for the sound of them. And again, another thing that pissed me off. Because everything, the idea is here, it's brilliant, and it just went about like the worst possible way you could.
I wanted to follow up on something that Grace said, that is, what if it could be used as a weapon? And I had the same thought while I was reading this, and I instantly thought of Orwell's Newspeak and the A and B vocabulary that were actually created to restrict thought and change how people thought about something within the book. And of course, 1984 has this whole political connotation, but it's, I will say, the other side of a coin that Babel-17 is presenting, using language in the negative way as well. And there was a sentence that, something that I wanted to read that follows up on what Jarrod said. I think it's page 133. If you have the right words, it saves time and makes things easier. And that idea, sometimes as a bilingual, I struggle with the right word. I end up having to describe it and going around it. And it felt so real. And it isn't that the doctor concept doesn't exist. It's just that, I can't explain it in a single word. When you have the single word for it, it's faster and more concise. And I think that actually leads to that scene of the 3 pages with a single paragraph, because Babel explains so much in so little. Every word has so much meaning packed into it that she's able to just make that whole stream of thought, right? And I thought that quite interesting as well. I'm not sure what are your thoughts on that.
Well, I think from somebody that has done a little bit of study in literature and how the study of the English language is actually this idea of codes and keys, about how people interpret. Like the idea of the missing piece from Brass works on 2 levels. One, it helps you identify him as a character, but it also puts you in a very primitive form as the reader of trying to work out what he's going to say, because like the letter P, there were a lot of words when the P wasn't there. I had to go back to the word and put the P in. You understand the sentence, if you know what I mean. I had to literally use that code in order to derive meaning from that. And I also wondered, how the hell did that sound when he wasn't saying it? What does that sound like? Like that's really strange. But it gives you an idea of how you can spot the pattern, and in a very primitive level, you can then interpret the pattern to then derive sense of something, even though it wasn't really given to you in the sentence. And I thought, again, that was like very, very clever in a lot of ways. And like, there's no doubt, maybe the book is cleverer than its execution for a lot of part. But I think of all of the books that we've read, when I was reading it, I was like, this is the one that I think I would derive the most enjoyment out of a reread from, especially kind of knowing and understanding what the book was setting about doing. A lot of those pages that I sort of skipped over and kind of went, I don't even know what's going on here. Like I'm just going to keep on barreling through and seeing what comes out at the end. I might get better meaning from them, better enjoyment out of for the down the line. And like, again, thank God these books are only 190 pages long, because if it had been 300, I might not have made it.
So Chris, you don't speak your dialogue out loud when you're reading?
Sometimes I do. Actually, what I will say is a technique that I would have if I'm struggling with dialogue or struggling with language is actually to read it out loud for myself. That is something that I do for a page or two to kind of get me in the flow and in the headspace. And sometimes verbalizing it does work.
I do it all the time. I have different voices for different characters and everything.
I generally do that when they, when they try to write a character that speaks wrongly and just put up the sounds. Like I can't make up the sounds, so I have to read them. And then I was like, oh, this is what the sounds make.
I have an interesting anecdote. While I was reading, there was one bit of dialogue, and because I was huffing throughout the book. It wasn't even F's sake. It was just, and my husband asked, what's wrong? I said, well, listen to this. And I just went and read the whole thing. And he went, oh, that sounds great. And it's loving it, by the way. But apparently, I thought I was just speaking, gobbledygook. And he was like, oh, that's interesting. But tell me more. It's like, are you kidding me? So maybe it's how the brain is wired. I don't know. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
To mention.
On the subject of dialogues, I actually did not have difficulty following along. And whatever difficulty I had was because of the indentation or like alignment of like it's so one whole sentence, like the same character would be speaking as in the paragraph, but one whole sentence would go on the next line, and because we're delineating by lines, I'd get confused and think it's the other person. But as long as I was able to attribute an entire sentence to a character, I didn't have that much difficulty following along with the dialogue. So that I thought that was interesting that that seemed to be a common problem. But whatever, I had dialogue problems because of printing issues.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I thought I was just curious, but I did have. Yeah, I made a list of all the interesting. Hello.
He wants to win.
I mean, I knew Susanna was angry, but dear God, to make that noise.
Oh, I thought that was some dialogue.
The of all the interesting tech that we came across in the stories, which I think also was used in the conclusion quite well. I m- I made a list of all of these, right? And then in the end, I was like, he's used almost every single one to explain Butcher. Uh, so the automatic James Bond
Oh, yes.
Butcher. Did I say Butcher? Butcher is one, and then I guess, well, not the discorporate stuff. That was cool. We have to talk about the discorporate
Mm.
beings, and the language, of course, he's ingrained with it. The plastic surgery that they are calling cosmetic surgery, which, by the way, the dragon in the shoulder was really cool. And then Butcher had that too. That's, although he apparently gained some extra abilities to destroy and recreate these things as well, which, yeah, that was pushing the boundaries a little bit on science and fantasy. But this was interesting. The cosmetic surgery also was used, and then yeah, there was one more. But anyway, that I thought that was really cool that he brought everything together, because he said this in his far future world where there's so much new tech, which is nice. I like when authors do that. I think I keep mentioning Philip K. Dick because he does this. Like, there's one theme that he's exploring, but the world has so many other interesting things to pick at if we wanted to. And this, but he brought it all together in the end. It's not just, hey, I had all these cool ideas, I put them in the book, but he also brought it together. So I thought that was nice.
In terms of the society and the space travel on this one, I thought it was very original and different. Like, it may not appeal to everyone because it's, as you said, more sci fantasy than science fiction, at least in how the ships work and so on. But I have been reading a long series about military sci-fi, and finding something different like this, I was like, oh yes, something.
Yeah.
This is a I don't know. I really like that idea of these corporates with the nose and the smell as positions
Yeah.
in the crew of the ship, and then the fact that I thought there was some trials as well that they had to be bond together partners or something that will actually
Mhm.
pilot man the ship, and I thought it was quite interesting, different as well.
Yeah. Oh, I remember how he brought the discorporate people back in. I think Rydra says something to the effect that the only thing, um, I think the only the human mind can process something on this scale, and that has been established before because the discorporate beings are able to
Yeah.
process so much data. So it's not. Uh, yeah, so that makes sense too. It's not a random statement about the power of the human mind. We've established that earlier in the story with the eyes, ears, and nose, the sensory parts of the ship. So yeah, I thought, yeah. Anyway,
Something I thought it was quaint about the discorporates is that they need these special devices to listen to them and remember,
Mm.
because otherwise don't remember. And Rydra resorts to translating instantly what she hears from them. And again, that hit home because in many cases I have been talking to people in English and somehow I translated it to Spanish in my mind, and then when I want to relay that conversation to somebody else, I think of the translation in Spanish. I can't think of the English. It has happened to me sometimes, and I thought it was quite realistic. Like, it was doable. What he was saying of how she handled the discorporate while translating it, I thought it was, yeah, it happens.
That's interesting. I didn't pick up on that at all. So
Yeah,
that's very interesting. Yeah.
I think she uses a weird language.
Called
I
Basque,
know
I think.
Basque. Yeah, she
Yeah.
uses Basque to translate it. So not a language everybody else is speaking, but the idea is the same. Your mind ends up automatically translating what you are hearing from one language to another.
Mm,
And yeah, so it was realistic in that sense.
yeah. The other two aspects of the language that were interesting was, I think there was, this one isn't focused on too much, but I think in the sequence where with those little text insets, I think it was there that she has an episode of synesthesia, is it, where she hears, like she smells something or she tastes uh, a, some external entity because of the language she was thinking in. So that was interesting, I thought. And then the slowing down time or metabolism aspect of it, that what do you think? Is that a possible with the language? It just, how did that read for all of you?
So she explained actually the thinking and the smells exactly through the bird as well, the myna bird as well, didn't she say? She said about how the myna bird would speak about something, and that's how she was able to tell that there was an earthworm near. And so that same idea was explained through that idea as well, and how that was very distracting. But the slowing down time again, I think, was very, very interesting, because I sort of think that's possible. Like I definitely do. If you can kind of think about how, when you think, or even like when you're working or engaged in a task, how time passes much more quickly. When you're engaged in a task. So I think a lot of that, but again, really interesting ideas to explore and kind of make you think about, which was certainly enough to get me to turn the page a lot of time. Like it was enough, even though there wasn't very much of a story and it didn't join together at all. It was enough to make me go, okay, keep on going. Like these chapters are quite short. The book's quite short.
And that's a good point there, because those ideas, the slowing down time thing, and the language thing that Livia was just saying, those are awesome ideas that I wish would have been explained a little bit better. That's all, because I feel like I missed out on getting that in a better way. I feel like I missed out on that. I wanted a better explanation of that stuff.
Yeah, I think he left it quite implicit, and I did feel that perhaps somebody that doesn't speak multiple languages wouldn't get some of these things, because that idea of the translation, it wasn't explained. I just completely 100% related to my own experience, and if it wasn't explained, right? I only interpreted that way because of my experience, right? And I think I agree with you, Gerald. It should have been.
Yeah,
If
I
it
got
were
more
better
out.
explained, it would be nice.
I got more out of it from your explanation now than I did from reading the book, and that's not how I want it to experience the book. I want to
If
get that out of the book.
if it's in a constellation, as a bilingual, I didn't get that. I mean, I got what he was trying to do, but it felt almost insulting. That's how we think, that's how it works. And I totally relate to your need to have an explanation. You wanted a narrative, you wanted a story, and it wasn't there. But I'm very curious. I'm listening and I'm fascinated, because completely different experiences. Livia, I'm not criticizing. I'm always fascinated when things don't align.
That's the beauty of books, right?
Yeah.
But it's what makes this kind of whole Masterworks reading group thing like just one of the highlights of the month for me, because I know when I'm reading, I'm never getting the full picture, if that makes sense. I'm always going to have an opportunity to get somebody else's point of view, and either they fill in the gaps or reaffirm exactly that my original idea that I didn't like it or otherwise was fair, right? If you know what I mean. There is other. It's almost like having the opportunity to reread something a couple of times, if you know what I mean. You read it once yourself, and then you get other people's perspectives, and it's almost like you've reread the book yourself by them filling in the blanks. And it does color your opinion of what the book is probably another 6 months down the line. When you think back in this book, you'll be like, you'll remember it was sort of frustrating, but you'll also maybe have a greater understanding of what the book maybe was trying to do that maybe I didn't get when I was reading it, you know, at the time, and kind of go, oh, okay, yeah. And then sort of that falls through in the maybe what my reading experience was or wasn't, you know, kind of colors it in some way. I think it's a really interesting idea.
I just remember I had great fun throwing my copy of Cities of Flight into the fireplace. It's awesome.
But we all had the same experience with that book. You see, you know, that was a communal throwing in the fire.
Oh, dear. No, again, a horrible story for me, because I'm such a bad person sometimes. So because I hated this book, so I gave it 2 stars. You know, I did just. But then I was thinking, oh well, but what? Because I had given 2 stars to City of Lights. So I said, well, that's not fair. So I went and changed the rating of City of Lights to 1.
I was going to say that was exactly the right solution to that. You know, that was unfair on Cities of Flight to give it 2 stars.
Terrible, but yeah.
I think I only had 1 2-star book last year, and it was Cities in Flight. Oh God.
I had to make it right, because even though I hated the book, it wasn't fair. So.
Yeah.
Good memories. Good memories. That's good.
Yeah.
One other thing that I just sort of wanted to bring up is sort of think Olivia touched on it earlier on, is this idea that the paradox has defeated the machine. I think this is very 1960s pre-computer kind of idea, and a lot of this links. I can't help but reading some of the short stories, the Ted Chiang short stories, etc., that we've read, and just see a lot of kind of similar ideas kind of flow through that. Whether it's the linguistics of story of your life. Didn't I get that right that time?
Yeah.
Portia? Yes, it's okay. And then short to the one that we read for the last episode, which was about the idea that actually machines can only think in certain ways. You know, they don't think curiously. They just think in structure or efficiency. You know, and the humans will always perceive problems differently than machines ever will. And a lot of those ideas coalesce in Babel-17, especially at the end, in terms of what we call the solution, if you want.
Yeah.
I just think it's really interesting how those things all tie together.
If I can make a comment on that. So these programming languages have something that is called paradigm, which is basically the type of a programming. It changes kind of like a bit the syntax and how you write. And I thought that the paradigms that were being used at the time this book was written were very structured, right? Instruction like one after the other. And nowadays we have a lot of different paradigms, and you write in a very different way depending on the one that you have. And even if the idea of machine learning already existed by this time, that is on the 50s, it wasn't popular. You weren't coding like that, right? So the idea of a structured, and you follow the instructions and you get a loop within those instructions if you did it wrong, that's quite period accurate, I would say, right? Nowadays, you will resort to other programming languages. You will resort to basically AI, in which you don't write instructions. It's a complete black box, right? And you will have different problems. I thought that the way he was talking about programming languages was very specific of the time it was written and how computers were programmed back then, right?
Sorry, go ahead, Jared.
No, go.
I was going to say, I didn't think of it then, but now listening to you and Chris talk about it, the whole paradoxes, it makes sense that that's how you would break a computer-like thing, because it's built on logical reasoning, right? So you, it's basically a sequence of applying a sequence of logic to the computer. Like, even to program an AI model, that's essentially what you have to do. The outcome is something that we don't fully understand, but to build that thing, you still use logic. So to break it using paradoxes, that makes perfect sense. So yeah,
It's basically Basically just writing a for loop and so that it can never kind of get to the bottom of it, you know.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fine, you know.
And recursion into Stack Overflow.
Yeah, indeed. You know, and so the idea is definitely sound, I think, but I think it does speak to the time the book was written. And actually that, I mean, it's still quite a bit ahead of its time in terms of actually having those ideas and
Yeah.
the idea of computers, etc., as a vehicle for how the world works is. It's like, I can't help but have my mind blown sometimes by how prescient and how predictive a lot of it was.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna make a crack about ChatGPT earlier, but a machine that understood Babel-17 bring on ChatGPT.
I mean, it's quite possible that ChatGPT is actually using Babel-17 as its language, which is
Mm.
probably why it just doesn't feel quite right, you know.
Yeah, that's why we're all addicted to social media. You know?
Yeah, but
We
even
didn't
if
have our
you,
brains.
even if you think of it this way, you can change how you speak depending the language that you are speaking, human
That's right.
side. And as a programmer, you also change how you quote unquote speak when you change the programming language that you are using to code,
Mhm.
right? It's not the same if you go from Fortran to Python, putting very extreme examples. But kind of like even if they are different types of languages, they have an underlying common factor there, which is how you express ideas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I recently had that experience trying to go from Java to Rust. Oh my god, I had to relearn so many things. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I
That-
see what you mean. Yeah.
See, that's a total another language to me. I have no idea what you just said.
Two different programming languages.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
that was easy for me, another completely new.
I'll give you a similar example. How do you get a 2-year-old to do something? You can't reason and talk with that 2-year-old in a certain way. You have to think of how you're going to approach and communicate with that child on a base level in a whole other way than you would for somebody else. It's again, it's a very similar idea, as
Yeah.
sort of explored in the book in some ways, and how that might drive you mad. Actually, this
Hmm.
totally works.
So, did anyone else read the foreword
Yes,
before reading the book?
Yes.
always. No.
So, before reading the book, right? They always, they always spoil the book, which sometimes doesn't matter. But in this case, there was the whole thing about the traitor, which in the foreword is revealed to be Readalong. So then I failed to feel any sense of dread about the
Hmm.
traitor, which I think was a big aspect of what could have made the story more interesting for me. Uh, like when they were in the bar, and okay, that scene was weird when the customs officer took the whole crew out, and they were like, "One of us might be working against you, but talk to us anyway." Okay, but but in the ship or in the mountain, Jabal Tariq, the fact that there could be a traitor who might sabotage anything, I feel like that could have made for a really dense or like thickening plot perhaps, but I didn't feel any of it because I'm like, it's her and she's here, we're seeing everything she's doing, nothing going on there. So yeah, how do you guys feel about that? I feel like it changed my reading experience quite a bit knowing that ahead.
I think I would have been quite frustrated because it doesn't even really like it would have become the point of the book, if you know what I mean. If it hadn't, you know what I mean, and it doesn't really resolve it in a satisfactory sense, that the plot line, because that's not what the book's about. Usually, by the time I read the foreword and get 3 chapters in, I've forgotten exactly what was in the foreword.
Okay.
Maybe it just helps having getting older. The brain cells don't work maybe quite as efficiently as they.
Well, I blame the for creating such a high expectation for the book because he was praising the genius and the young man's book, restless energy, and just all the adjectives. And I was expecting something fantastic. And yeah, no. So I would change some of these adjectives.
Oh.
uh,
I don't know. I didn't have a forward in my copy,
Oh.
so
Yeah.
but I don't know. I didn't really feel, because of the plot and the rest of the book wasn't that gripping. The traitor plot also wasn't that gripping for me as I was reading it, and so I was just like, because it didn't grab me. It didn't grab me the same way the characters didn't grab me that much, and everything else that was problematic for this book as for myself, and so it I don't know, it didn't it wasn't something that I was like on the edge of my seat. Who's the traitor? You know, I was like, I was like, I'll either find out or I don't, and
Yeah.
kind of left it at that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I don't think, if I hadn't known, I doubt that I would have spent a lot of energy trying to figure it out, because we don't know enough about any of the crew members to like make it a whodunit thing. But
if there was more
Yeah.
tension built up, like if there was more tension built up towards it, if like the whole crew was blaming the butcher or something like that, or but there was none of that. There wasn't that kind of like the mystery wasn't built up enough to make it a focus of who is the traitor, and so it was kind of just a side thing along the way, and
they had a very cavalier attitude about it, right? They brought the whole crew on. They didn't try to isolate anyone, which makes sense. Like, innocent until proven guilty. But also, like, during that dinner scene with the customs officer, and was General Forrester there? And the psychologist. They're like, yeah, one of us might be working against her, but it's fine. Just tell us what you ask your questions.
Nothing we can do about that. It's a very cavalier attitude towards doing it, to progressing the plot of the book. We need to get to the end of the book, is basically what it said.
Yeah, only 5 pages. Can't get into the details. and I also feel like we don't know enough about the invasion and the alliance to care one way or the other. Like, yeah, sure. Yeah, it's fine if your ship gets eaten.
In modern times, this definitely would have been setting up probably 18, 19, 20, 21, as books to follow it,
Was there any other
insights here?
No more rants.
No more rants.
So where does it rank for everybody within the series?
What we got? How many we got so far?
Six.
Yeah.
So this is the 6th.
Yeah.
5.
Yeah, just slightly. At least there was no mansplaining, so I'll give it that with Melanie Phillips.
The wonders of having a female lead character, no mansplaining. Excellent. That's all.
I haven't read all of the same, from the start, but so far nothing can top Flowers for Algernon for me.
That one's
which was released the same year. I was just actually looking. Part of the thing where Susanna was going like, how do people love this? And I thought maybe the books in 1966 were all shocking, but that was not the case. The Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead in cold blood. Flowers for Algernon. Taipan came out that year. The Moon is a Horse Mistress by Heinlein as well. So there were a lot of very good books out that year.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess Flowers for Algernon is coming up next year.
Next year, yeah. I'm barely.
But yeah, for me, I think I'm gonna do buckets rather than ranks. So Forever War and Androids, same bucket. Cities in Flight is in its own. It can have a well for all I care.
It's buried. It's in its own coffin.
5 place.
I think Stars My Destination, This Guy, and I Am Legend go in the same bucket. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I have them sort of similar. I think I've Legend somewhere floating between the two buckets. It's fallen out of one bucket, trying to crawl its way across the floor, but didn't quite make it. I have to keep on putting it back in the other bucket. Back to your home.
I'm picturing a book crawl. Sneaking.
I'm nearly there, guys. I'm nearly there. I made it.
I can't imagine that.
I mean, this is its own sci-fi story all by itself.
There you go.
Yeah, we haven't had any other biological sci-fi. Maybe this one counts, but no other biology sci-fi. But not yet, anyway. Cool. In that case, the next three books, once again, that we're going to be reading are Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny, The Fifth Head of Cerberus by Gene Wolfe, and Gateway by Frederick Pohl over February, March, and April. If you'd like to join us, oh, sorry, we didn't do outros. Susanna, would you like to start us off this time?
Well, you can find me at Page Chewing Forums or my channel, Den of the Weird, or X as Chronodendron. My books can be found pretty much anywhere. I have a new one coming out named Oublié, and it's available for pre-order on Amazon only for now.
All right. I'm Jared. You can find me at the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and you can also find me at Page Chewing Forums, and where I hang out a lot with Chris.
Oh, that was smooth,
Nice.
wasn't it? It wasn't that good. Well, my name is Chris Mullen. I sometimes make YouTube videos, sometimes make videos with the rest of this lovely crowd as well. And you can find me probably over in the Page Tuner forums on the occasions that I can not be lazy and post comments.
Thanks. You can find me on YouTube, Twitter, or X, Threads, Instagram, everywhere as Livia J. Elliott. And I also hang out on the Page Chewing Forum.
Cool. And you can find me haunting the Page Chewing Forum as well. And as I was starting to say earlier, if you'd like to join us for this reading group or any of the other 4 or 5 we've got going on, consider checking out the Page Chewing Forum. We'll see everyone in about a month to talk about Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny.